Welcome to Your Best Interviews. My name is Eric Smith. Thank you so much for spending the time with me. I know there's a lot of places you could go, and so I appreciate you spending it here. If this is helpful, please share with others. My goal is to help as many people as possible during this time. Today, what I want to talk about is what questions and how to think about questions for the end of an interview. So I would say most of the time, you're going to have time to ask questions at the end of an interview, and you should think these through, right? You don't want to get stumped. You don't want to sit there and think, well, I don't have any questions. Like that shows that you're not real interested. So you want to think through what questions you're asking. But as you're listing out your questions, what you really want to think about is, are these questions relevant for the role that I'm applying for? And then you also want to think about who are you interviewing with and who are you asking the questions to? So typically, if you're interviewing with a recruiter, any role-specific questions like what's the day-to-day look like, what are the specifics of the program I'm going to be working with, or maybe it's the particulars of the ins and outs of that job. A recruiter probably isn't going to know that. What they'll typically say is, that's something that the hiring manager is going to have to tell you if you move forward in the process. So really try and get an understanding of who you're meeting with, and then formulate questions based on that. So if you're meeting with a recruiter, a good question would be, what's the timeline for this? Is this a backfill? Is this a new position? What's the company culture like? What do you like best about the job? You're asking relevant questions, right? Like you want to make sure your questions are focused on the role that you're applying to, the company that you're applying to. So they shouldn't be, out there questions like what's the CEO's values, like that a recruiter A can't answer, and B that has nothing to do with what you're applying to. So really focus your questions around the role that you're applying to, and then drill down even further to who you're interviewing with. So a recruiter, again, you want to ask about maybe the company, what they enjoy about working for that company. If there are some very high-level questions about the role that a recruiter realistically could answer, it's okay to ask those. And it's also okay to preface like, hey, you might not know this, or this might be a better question for the hiring manager, but here's, whatever your question may be. But if your questions are all tailored to the specifics of the role or programs within the role or what the day-to-day looks like, the hiring manager is going to be best to answer those. So focus your company questions, your timeline questions, those things towards a recruiter. And then if you're meeting with the hiring manager, that's where you can ask questions that because they're the one ultimately making the decision on you. And so questions around like, what is your ideal candidate look like, or what's your best employee, best person on the team doing today that maybe your worst person isn't. Or, what's maybe a better way to phrase that would just be like the best person on your team today. Like, what are they doing differently that you wish everyone could replicate? Like, that's a great question. And it gets the hiring manager thinking about like their best employee and associating that with you trying to replicate that, which is a good thing. You can ask what the day-to-day looks like, what the culture on their team is, things like that. But they're more specific to the hiring manager that they can specifically answer for you. So as you're thinking about your questions for the end of the interview, I'd take it on it, like write out all the questions that you have about that role, and then pick your 3 to 5 best, because that's typically all you're going to ask. You're not going to get time to ask 10 or 15 or 20 questions. You're typically going to have the very end of the interview. And so you want to make sure you have questions that are thoughtful, that are relevant for the role that you're applying to, but also you want to make sure that you're asking questions that are relevant to the person that you're interviewing with. So have maybe a list of questions that you would ask a recruiter, and then have a list of questions that are a little bit more specific to the role that you maybe ask the hiring manager or the person that oversees that hiring manager. So you kind of want to have different buckets based on who you're meeting with, but the biggest thing to keep in mind is keep your questions focused on the role that you're applying to, maybe what the day-to-day looks like, or the company as a whole, but something that a recruiter could answer or hiring manager could answer. And that's typically your best bet. Keep in mind, you're going to have a shortened amount of time. So 3 to 5 questions is typically all you're going to get. So have your bucketed list, and then star the ones that are most important to you. And based on how the interview goes, maybe some of those questions get answered, maybe some of them don't. Or maybe some of the questions that didn't seem as relevant before jump to the top of the list in terms of relevancy. So have your list, have them ready to go. And it's okay if they turn it around and say, like, what questions do you have? To open your folio or whatever you brought with your pen and paper to reference the questions that you do have, and also to jot notes as you're going. It just shows that you're attentive and that you're taking things seriously. So good luck. Prepare ahead of time. Know who you're interviewing with, and have your different buckets of different questions. Good luck.